Hello lovely people, welcome to another video. I am the autistic autist, and this video we will talk about what is the difference between neurotypical and neurodiverse brains. I'm also going to explain what neurotypical and neurodiverse even means. A little disclaimer before we start. First, this topic about the brain of autists is still one that needs to be researched, and where not everyone is agreeing. There are a lot of people out there who still believe a lot of misinformation about autists, which is very sad, and I found a lot of articles while researching that were still believing that there is low empathy in autists, which isn't the case. So it was hard, and I just wanted to give you a disclaimer that you're probably going to find different opinions. Not really, because scientists shouldn't have opinions, but it's like scientists look at data and then they tell what they get out of the data. And there are different levels of research. So some are just from mice and some are made with humans. And some people look at the data from mice and say, well, we need data from humans because that's not enough. While it is an interesting thing that you found out, I want to read more. And others are just believing the information they heard when they were younger and aren't really getting up with the new information coming out. And I, as an autist, looked at the data, and I talked to my psychologist who has diagnosed me, and he gave me some interesting data, and that is the one that we will discuss today. So let's start by looking at some art that I made. I have a book where I basically paint stuff that I need to learn, and I thought there might be some interesting things for you. I just want to give you a quick overview about the brain. A quick and easy one. That is the brain from the bottom. So we have here a part called cerebellum. That's these two circles. That's the brainstem. And that's the telencephalon, the big part of the brain that basically is what makes us humans so different from other animals out there. And let's look at it from the side. Over here you can see now we kind of cut it in half, and in there is another part that I'm currently studying a lot. But what is important here is that we kind of take a look at what information we found out about the different parts. So I made a little artwork down here, and as you can see, we call this part in the front the frontal lobe. Then we have the parietal lobe. That's hard for me to speak in English. I hope I spelled that correct. It's Parietallappen in German, so yeah. Then we have the temporal lobe, the cerebellum, the brainstem, and the occipital lobe down there. And as you can see, I have made some different colors in here. The yellow one down there marks that there is where we process the information about seeing. Then in the front here we have a part that is for the motoric information. So we have basically a map of our whole body, and we process how it's not the only place where we process movement. That's something very complex, but that's kind of a map, and the motoric part is important in this map. I said motoric one is important because at the back of this kind of line that we have in our brain, there's another map of our body, but this one is for sensory input. And that sensory input is also what is the very annoying, I would say, thing when you lose a limb, because you can have phantom pain, because this map still has your leg, arm, hand, whatever there. And so it's kind of like, hello, answer me. And that's the problem with that. But we are talking about autism right now. So we have some parts about talking around this kind of lump army thing that goes down there. So there's the lumpy army thing, and down here and over here we have two parts that are important for speaking. One is for the where you move your mouth and all of that stuff, and one is for the way you process the words into the thing that is going wrong right now. Like you want to say something, and how you actually transform it into speech. That's also very important, as you can see here. And then we have also something for hearing that is right here. And that's basically the basic information. It's a lot more difficult, of course, but that's also a bit over my level of knowledge. And maybe once I've studied more about it in a few years, I will make another video explaining things in more detail. But I'm trying to give you a brief overview, and I think that my knowledge is above the average knowledge, so it might be easier to transform my little more above knowledge into something you can understand. I hope that was some kind of word sentence thing that you understood. Yeah. You might think I'm nervous, and I am nervous, or I'm like, my brain is constantly like, say something, say something, say something, make words. And then I kind of come to a point where my brain is thinking of so many things at the same time that I'm so overwhelmed that my mouth is just like, nope, I'm just going to say none of that. So that's what's kind of happening here. And it can be connected to autism. We will learn about that later. But I'm just going to give you another look of the brain. And that's that one. That's the brain cut like there. And you can say that inside of the brain we have these parts. Those are like the outside, filled with the main part of the neurons. And those white parts are where kind of the cables are running. So the information is kind of brought from there through those wires that are in here. And then we have the cerebellum, which I also painted here. And the cerebellum has an important part in kind of muscle movement, planning how to move something, eye movement, and balance, and all that stuff is in here. So we kind of have a little overview now of where what is happening. I'm just going to give you a little revision. So we have the motoric map over here. We have the sensoric map over here. On the back, we have the center where the visual information is transformed. Then we have hearing down here, and forming speech and understanding speech over here. And then we have in the back there the cerebellum, which is part of how things move. The things in the middle that I showed you, like in the cut through, those are also important for speech, and they also have other roles like emotional things. And there are also brain cells in there that are for basic living things, like having a sleep rhythm and the hormones that are circulating in your body that are needed for so many things, like eating or growing and all of that stuff. So it is way more complicated, and everything has specific parts, and everything is kind of connected. But that's where we come to a very important point. and where I'm zooming back out because now I don't have to show you something anymore. So, welcome back. I'm just going to put something as a decoration in here, and oh, it's not visible. Well, I tried. Anyway, I'm just going to take... Whoops! I'm just going to take my handy dandy iPad where I put on my information, because what we are going to talk right now is about the wiring of our brain. So how are the parts connected? Because our brain is working together. As I told you, with movement, we have like this part and this part at the top and the parts in the middle, and they all are kind of working together and bringing the information to our body. Where the muscles are, where also neurons are sitting and giving information. So it's kind of something that all needs to work together. But I think you all know that something cannot just work in one way, that you can wire something in different ways and still there is some outcome that does similar things. But our brains are all not built the same. They all are a little wired differently because we kind of grow up and we get information, and that's why we are all different human beings. But there is something that makes us autists a little different from others. And that is just the way that we are wired differently, which has positive and negative effects. There are 3 clusters that were found in a study that were differently connected. And there are 2 kind of ways things can be differently connected in autists. And none of these is saying that that is better or worse, it's just saying different. There's something that is called hyperconnectivity, and hyper, I always imagine someone being like, oh, totally hyper, so there's a lot going on. So hyperconnectivity means that there are more connections made. And hypoconnectivity means there are less connections made. That doesn't mean that less connections are bad or that more connections are good. It just means that it is different than what we found in the neurotypical normal brains. So we have found some hyperconnectivity in the middle frontal gyrus and frontal pole, which is the frontal part of the brain. We also have found hyperconnectivity in other parts of the frontal brain, and we have found hyperconnectivity in the cerebellum back there. Then we have found hypoconnectivity in the temporal gyrus, so in the temporal part. Gyrus always means like, maybe I need this thing again. So, like you have this wobbles out and you have the marks inside. And the gyrus is always one of those wobbles. And the brain is just wobbly because this way it can have more layers. And we only have the neurons sitting on the outer layer. So with making it wobbly, we have more space for neurons. That's why it's the way it is. And I'm not gonna lie, just a little funny information. As I started medicine, I really, really hoped that nobody gave all of these little wobbles a name and all of the specific parts and stuff. It is that way. Like every small thing has a name, and fortunately I don't have to learn them right now, but they will come in the future. But you start with the basics, and fortunately we can work without that. Maybe the research that I'm reading from here worked with it, but it's not that important for understanding the basic information that I'm trying to bring over. I just wanted to say what the research found out. So we found hyper and hypoconnectivity somewhere, which means that we found basically a different wired brain in autists. And what does that mean? Well, basically a neurotypical brain, once it grows up, decides which specific parts are used very often, and then it makes those more important. And basically your brain matures in a way that is like getting rid of old stuff that you don't need and focusing more on the stuff that you are needing. neurotypical brains in general are just like focusing on the most important stuff. In science, we have that word called discrimination, and you all know that from something very bad. But it can be very effective for neurotypical people because they get the sensory input from all of the nerves, like the eyes and the ears and all of that stuff. And they discriminate between the information that they really need and the information that is not that important. Like, for example, a clock ticking. You don't really need to have that ticking all the time. So your neurotypical brain will not focus on that information. Our neurodiverse brains, on the other hand, manage the information differently. They don't discriminate like that. They have all of the information coming into us. So, as you can imagine, that leads to us kind of being more overwhelmed because there's so much information that we focus on and not just the one information that we really need, for example. But that also means different things. So while the neurotypical brain matured in that kind of getting rid of stuff way and focusing on different stuff, our brains kind of keep a more diffuse way of connecting stuff. And that means that we focus and connect different stuff. So, for example, I connect numbers with personalities, and I often connect stuff with personalities. It also means that the number 1 is having a kind of mean personality to me, and the number 6 is a quite modelly figure in my brain. Like, it's just connected that way. And 16 is like when you combine the 6 that really wants to care for people with the 1 that really doesn't care at all. And it's kind of sad to me to look at that number because I'm like, the poor 6 is trying so hard, but the 1 is just ignoring her. Like, that's what's going on in my brain with numbers, and that's why I remember numbers different and most of the time better than others. But why, for example, calculating is hard for me, because I have to focus on all of that emotions that come up with the numbers, and then I divide them, and then there are new numbers, and the happy things get destroyed, and there are bad things coming out. So basically, calculating it's way different from neurotypical brains. But that connection thing also means that I think of different things when we are in a conversation about something. So I might have an idea that you never thought about. And that makes autists so special for our society, because we think differently, and thinking different is only threatening if you want that everyone is the same, and you want that nobody can think outside the box because you're scared of them figuring something out. So I think if you have a healthy society, you need people that think differently and that look at things from a different angle. And that's where autists can be so important. There are, though, also different things that come just with having a more diffuse connection and a different connection in your brain. It has been found that we autists can't switch that easily from something we were working on to something different. So you might have noticed that the light changed because it was annoying me so bad. So I put down the blinds because that was annoying. Anyway, what I was trying to say is the brain is differently wired and different parts are working together more than in neurotypical brains because the wires weren't cut. So when you are trying to switch, more things need to switch, and that makes it just harder for us. So transitioning is just harder for us. So we also have found that our connections have an increased duration, which means basically that when we get some information into our brain, then our brain makes a connection. And that's the same for neurotypical and neurodiverse. But those connections can be overwritten. And what we found out is that in autists, that information isn't overwritten that fast. And that makes it harder to process new or unexpected stimuli that we are experiencing. And making it hard for us to switch means one very specific thing, that I have a hard time starting something new, and other artists, but I also have a hard time stopping something. So when I make a drawing, then I like prepare in my head before I actually start, and then once I start it, I'm going to finish it. Like I'm sitting there for the whole time until I think it's finished. And that's just how my brain is wired differently. And some people think that it's cool because I'm like done with the homework the same day that I got it. But it's also coming with that thing that I forget everything else and I'm hyper focusing on it. So I'm going to be very drained once I'm finished with it because that break thing isn't there. And another important part of this is just that when you have so many different regions that are connected, then it's harder to like let go of something that is not that important. So when I sit in a room, I hear that constant ticking and it's just constantly there. And I don't get rid of it like your brain, because you can just, I'm not telling you that you are focusing pretty easily on something, but it's harder for me to focus because I just can't get rid of it. And while growing up, not knowing that I was autistic, people were just saying like, ignore it. And I was like, I can't ignore it. And what I constantly heard was try harder. And that was why that autism diagnosis made me so happy, because that was basically saying, it's not you not trying hard enough. That's just how your brain is wired and how you are. And that meant so much to me, because when you are just constantly trying harder to be the way that other people want you to be because they want to fit you in that box, that just makes your life very stressful. And that had a lot to do with me not liking myself, because I thought I'm just lazy, I'm not trying hard enough, I'm not good enough. And once I got rid of all of that, I started to embrace my difference. And I'm like, I might have a harder time doing this, but I have that I'm very good of, and other people have that too. And we generally should not try to make everyone the same, as I told you earlier. But it's just easier for me to say, like, when people are like, why are you so sensible? Like, why are you hurt by this and that? And why are you just constantly thinking about that thing that happened 2 hours ago that we all forgot? It's just, I'm wired differently, and that's okay. So basically, those hyperconnections, that means the connections that are made more, makes our brain process the stimuli different. And the scientists looked at which things are hyperconnected, and I told you the basic places of where they are, but they were connected with autistic behaviors, and I'm telling you which ones right now, and I'm reading them off because they are a lot. Interpreting touch and sensation. So I am not neurotypical, and I never was, so I don't know how you feel touch, but I know that it's something that is very known to my brain. Like, I know which parts of my clothes are touching me, and I constantly know that. So I will not wear something for a long time that is very strong around my neck, because I just know that it's there and it's so uncomfortable to constantly feel that. And I know that my socks are there, and I can't wear itchy stuff because I constantly know it's itchy, it's itchy, it's itchy, it's itchy. So that touch and pain signals are different for me. Then we have proprioception, that is the position and movement and actions of our body. And I, as a lot of other autists, am clumsy, which means I constantly hurt myself, basically. I heard other people say to me, like, how can you just run against that door? Like, how is this even happening? You've seen that door. And I'm just like, well, when I was calculating it, I was going straight through the hole that is in here and not running against that block of wood, but must have miscalculated somewhere. So let's go on because my camera needs to charge. We have meditating the vestibular system, which is balance and movement and coordination, and that also goes to the point that I just explained. Auditory processing, so hearing stuff, same as touch, just I can't get rid of the things like the ticking clock. Understanding visceral and somatic sensations. Interoception, the sensations inside of our body. Moderating and facilitating sleep. I have a hard time falling asleep. Recognizing faces. A lot of autists can't really remember faces that easily. Controlling facial expressions. I think that I'm constantly overexpressing, but I'm just used to it because I know that people move their faces, and I just learned that when I at least move my face in some way, they think I'm normal, so I'm constantly doing that, and I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm just moving in some way. Emotional recognition, understanding, and expression. I have a hard time reading between lines, but on the other hand, when I go into a room and a lot of people are sad, I just know, I feel this sadness so strong, and it's really tearing me down. In the same way when people are happy, I'm overly excited because everyone is happy, and I'm just really feeling that. Then empathy, which also goes to that point that I just told. And social cognition, attention, and risk-taking. So what is important to know is that those are not better or worse. They are processed differently, and they are different. The thing it is pointing out is that autists process that different. It doesn't say that they process it more or less, and that's very important. You can't say they have low empathy, because some of them have, like me, very high empathy. It's just different, and that's the important thing. One other important thing is our interaction skills are different. We communicate different. We don't look into others' eyes that often, you see me closing my eyes or looking to the ground. But what is just important to know in interaction is that we mature slower. So our friendships are different, and I have problems with realizing that a person can be mean to me and also nice to me. So I'm I can't process that information. I'm why is the same person this? And I mature differently from different things. The relationship with family was different. I have different relationships with friends, and that was harder for me to get into these. I'm basically I like you, let's be friends, how you did it in kindergarten. I'm not just small talking. I'm not trying to get information through some I don't get that whole thing around. I'm just very direct, and people are often intimidated, and I also get that I'm often scared when people come to me, because I'm just what do they want? What do I have to do? Oh my gosh, that's a new person. How is she interacting? What did I need to know? And it's just all very stressful for me. But when you look at me, I'm yeah, how nice to meet you. And I'm trying really hard, but you don't know what's going on inside of me. And I just want to let you know that when someone says he's autistic and you're always but you were always so normal, then please think that we maybe masked in front of you, so we were showing you that we are normal, even though we just were pretending because we want to be accepted. So now I'm done with my little explanation, and I hope it helped you to kind of understand a little bit more. I wish I could just show you the brain and be this is where we interpret the visual information, and this is where there is a different connection, which means this and that. But unfortunately, research isn't there yet, so I just showed you where the specific parts are. and what we can kind of see right now. And the most important thing is basically that there is a different wiring going on. So we are just processing stuff differently, and that is known. So that's not something that I'm telling you, which is probably the case. Like, there were MRI pictures done of neurotypicals and autists, so we know that they are different. And that's why we say neurodiverse, because the whole situation of our brain, like all the neurons, are just firing in a different way. And that's just important to know, because some people are like, try harder, and some people are trying to confront us with things that are scaring us, and that's just the wrong way. And I've tried it that way because I heard it, but it's not working. It's just making everything worse. Like, for example, forcing kids to stare into the eyes of others because it's like normal, and they are trying to just train us to do it. But it's not how things work. We are just getting scared. Like, it's very intimidating to need to do that, and I trained myself to do it, and it just makes conversation so uncomfortable for me. So basically, when you train a kid to look into others' eyes, you are making conversations so uncomfortable that they are probably not going to like conversations in the future, and they are always connecting them with that, because we have a good memory, so we are not going to forget those horrible feelings we had. So it just doesn't work. And if you are autistic, don't try to force yourself to do that. And if you have an autistic child, just work with its difference and try to help him or her or whatever to learn to live in that world in a way that is comfortable for him or her, or, you know. And if you were just here to learn something, I hope you learned something. Like, I hope I was able to explain it to you. Yeah, I hope we will see each other in my next video. And now move on to the end card. Bye!